I'm joined by Jonathan Steele, former chief correspondent of the Guardian newspaper, now commentator on international affairs. Jonathan, thanks for speaking to RT.
Yep.
Now, the UK's recently been approached by the King of Jordan to spearhead a diplomatic offensive against Assad. William Hague, the Foreign Secretary, has now met with the opposition leaders. Is this the preamble to another Libyan-style intervention?
It could be. I mean, we can't be sure, and I think it's dangerous. It might be. I mean, they're trying to... Hague's message to the opposition was to get your act together, unite on a common platform. In other words, to turn yourself much more like the Libyan opposition, who the government also talked to and then eventually recognised as the official government of Libya. So I think it is the first stage to trying to recognise the opposition. And there are hints, more from France than from Britain at the moment, that there would be some kind of foreign intervention. I mean, the French Foreign Minister, Alain Juppé, has just called for humanitarian corridors to be opened into Syria, with or without the Syrian government's permission in Damascus. And when he was asked, does that mean who would protect these corridors? Would there be military protection? He said, of course. So in other words, they are thinking of having a limited number of foreign military people moving into Syria, perhaps against the will of the government of Damascus.
What must the opposition now do to gain recognition? Has their militarisation made it easier to achieve that?
Well, I think the unity thing, which Hague was going on about, is what they want. They want to sort of feel this united platform, and so they know who they're dealing with. They don't want a lot of different competing groups. But the question is, what will the platform be? Is it going to be a very hardline platform that keeps repeating that Assad must go, or would it be a platform that says we need dialogue and a transition which is peaceful, rather than a civil war and an armed struggle like in Libya? So that's very important. The other thing is whether they will try the tactic of saying we have to protect civilians, the Benghazi syndrome. If they could say the city of Hama or Homs needs protection, and then they could have a no-fly zone over that city, and then it's the thin end of a wedge which would move out to becoming full-scale support for one side in the civil war. The trouble is, of course, that Hama and Homs, the two cities that have had most fighting, are not on the sea. Benghazi was on the coast in Libya. That made it much easier to have a no-fly zone and then to start bringing in ships, bringing in weapons and supplies and all the rest of it. More difficult in Syria, unless they nominate one of the coastal cities on the Mediterranean and the safe zone. But it's a bit unlikely at the moment, because those cities have been relatively quiet in this uprising.
The Arab League's already suspended Syria and recently issued that 3-day ultimatum that's now passed. These attempts were portrayed as last-ditch attempts at conventional diplomacy, but could they not do more to mediate? Isn't that their role?
Yes, I mean, they keep saying that Assad should have dialogue with the opposition, but the opposition, including the people that Hague was meeting in London this week, are against dialogue. They just simply say Assad must go, and that's also the line of the British government and the French government and the US government. I mean, they should be putting the same pressure on the opposition to enter a dialogue as they're putting on the government in Damascus. I mean, it's ridiculous just to say one side must start talking. Who are they going to talk to if the other side refuses?
They seem to be siding with Assad's opponents here. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think they've decided that Assad is a lost cause, in the sense that they don't like his links to Hezbollah in Lebanon. They don't like the fact that he's sort of in the front line of opposition to Israel. Jordan, Egypt have their treaties with Israel. Syria is the only country with a sort of long border with Israel that is not sort of at peace at the moment, and so they don't like that. And of course, Syria has quite good relations with Iran. So they've decided, I think, that it's almost like a proxy war against Iran. If you can topple Assad, it's considered to be a sort of proxy blow against the government in Iran.
So does the fear of Iran really outweigh any concern of Syria descending into civil war?
Well, I'm not even sure it's fear. Are they really afraid of Iran? I think it's more that they want to undermine the regime in Iran. I think it's hostility to Iran, I would say, rather than fear of, because what is there to be afraid of with Iran? The only thing is this question of nuclear weapons, which is still a long way down the line before Iran would have a deliverable nuclear weapon. It's first got to create the warheads on the weapons, if it's building them, and then it's got to have the delivery system that could transport these things safely and, drop them in the right position and fire them at the right target, which is some way off. So there's no reason to be really afraid of Iran. And anyway, there are other ways of dealing with the so-called Iranian threat than military, where there could be plenty of diplomatic ways of minimizing whatever worries you have about Iran.
Surely the Arab League, though, and Western countries have some sort of duty here to prevent Syria from slipping into a full-blown civil war. I mean, it's not the first time a Middle Eastern country with a complex religious and ethnic makeup has descended into civil war. Have lessons not been learnt there?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I think it's quite irresponsible. I mean, and it's really amazing in a way that these Arab neighbours of Syria and the other members of the Arab League are taking such a hard line. But I think it's this cancer of the Sunni-Shia thing, which is, as I say, a proxy war between the Gulf Arabs, who are mainly Sunni, against the Iranian Shia regime, which is causing the cancer. And I'm afraid it's been the United States have been pushing this line. Iran is a threat and a danger, we must be afraid of it. And we saw a lot of it in Iraq, of course, the Sunni-Shia thing, and that created a near-civil war in Iraq. It's terribly dangerous, and one would have thought, and of course in Lebanon also, earlier, one would have thought that people would say, look, the last thing we want is another Sunni versus Shia military civil war going on in one of the major Arab countries. They should be doing all they can to try and stop it. Now, I'm saying, obviously, that Assad has made many, many mistakes. He should have not used force so much at the beginning. He should have offered more serious dialogue. At the beginning, his offers were quite flimsy and probably deceptive deliberately. And, he has been very hard-line. But the other side is now being equally hard-line, and the situation is becoming polarized.
What's the worst-case scenario should Syria completely collapse into civil war?
Well, the worst-case scenario is massive ethnic cleansing, with the Alawite majority from whom the Assad family comes and the ruling elite being forced to flee. The Christians, who are about at least 10% of the population, possibly more, in Syria, are very worried. They probably, most of them, as what one understands, prefer the Assad regime, which has been very tolerant to Christianity, no problem with any kind of religious discrimination. They're more worried about the Muslim Brotherhood, who are the main force in the opposition, the armed opposition to Assad, than they are about the Assad regime. So Christians could suffer greatly. Look what's happened to Iraqi Christians. Most of them have had to flee. The Kurds are in a sort of wobbly position. They don't know which side is worse for them. Is Assad worse than the possible Sunni Arab Muslim Brotherhood coming in? So I think a lot of the minorities are really worried, and I think that's partly why there are these big demonstrations in support of Assad in Damascus and Aleppo. They're not all people who've been sort of forced out into the streets in some way or other. Some of them are genuine. I think obviously we can't do a sort of exact analysis of how many are genuine and how many have come out, because they might be government workers who think that they can lose their jobs if they don't come out. But you can't get so many people out on the street without some of them being genuine.
On the other hand, though, President Assad has certainly committed some terrible atrocities against his own people. Is that initial crackdown not to blame for the current situation?
Well, I think that's why you need mediation. I mean, Assad has made terrible mistakes, and a lot of people have been killed by the security forces, and obviously the families and friends of those people, feel extremely angry, and they just want Assad to disappear. So you can see why it's difficult. But that's why you need mediation. If Assad just to invite people, say, come to my office and we'll sit down and we'll talk about things, it may be too late for that, because there's so much suspicion. So that's why the Arab League, ideally, should be the mediators, coming in and meeting each side separately, perhaps to initially say, what are you willing to give, what concessions are you willing to make, and can we find a compromise, and then at some point everybody comes into the room together. But you may need outside mediation, ideally by the Arab League, if not by the United Nations. But I think one of the things that should be on the table is immunity for Assad. He's not going to give up power peacefully. When he sees what's happened to Mubarak, put in prison or house arrest, in his case hospital arrest because he's ill, and then trial, or the Gaddafi precedent, which is to be lynched in the street on YouTube. That's not. So you need immunity. And actually, we've got a very good model in Yemen. They've signed a deal, which the Arabs brokered, the Saudi Arabians brokered, whereby President Saleh has now given up power in return for immunity for his family and himself, and a transition to new elections within the next few months, both for Parliament and for President. It's a very good model. Now, why can't the Saudis, who did that with Yemen, do the same thing for Syria?
What have countries like the UK, France, America got to gain with Syria here? There's no oil wealth. Is it purely its strategic location, or is it the Iran question?
It's the anti-Iranian thing and the feeling that Assad is unreliable on the Israeli question, and he's sort of... They've had intermittent talks with Assad, but they've never reached a peace agreement. But it's not just because of Assad. The Israeli line is also very hard, and so both sides have really found it impossible to agree.
Does the international community genuinely not see, then, the dangers of civil war in Syria, or is that merely outweighed by the need for influence and intervention in Syria?
Well, I think they probably made a cynical calculation. They look at Libya, and we don't know exactly how many people were killed in Libya. Some people say 30,000 people died in the 6 months or so that it took to topple Gaddafi. Well, they're sort of saying, well, that's worth it if you can bring in a different regime, which will be obviously more pro-Western, at least initially, if it's had Western support to topple the regime.
Jonathan Steele, thank you.